Hi, I'm Mark Kuban, publisher of industry magazine Inside Film.
I'm Jackie Keast, the editor of Inside Film.
We're self-appointed experts in content and in making each other laugh.
Welcome to our podcast on the Tools, where we recommend things you should watch, listen to, read, or scroll through.
This week we're talking about two podcasts, Ear Hustle and Shadow of Truth.
The app Depop and the Instagram account at Depop Drama.
And website and app New Atlas. Hump day. Yeah. On the tools. So
We're back.
we're on our sixth ep.
We're still here.
We're still here. We haven't been pulled yet. They haven't pulled the plug. So we'll just keep on going. What have you been listening to?
I've been listening to a podcast called Ear Hustle, and probably maybe people have heard of this podcast. I mean, it's pretty popular. It has topped the Apple podcast charts in the past. So perhaps it's not breaking new ground for me to talk about this, but I love this podcast. So Ear Hustle is a podcast about prison life, which is produced from inside California's San Quentin State Prison, which has a men's prison. There's about 4,000 men there. It's mostly a medium security prison, but there are about 700 people on death row. This is despite the fact that no one has been executed in California since 2006. So the podcast was launched in 2017. It's co-hosted by Nigel Poor, who's a visual artist who volunteers in the prison, and Erlen Woods, who at that point was about 20 years into a 31-year to life sentence for second-degree robbery. And another prisoner, Anton Williams, he does the show's sound design. And the sound design in this show is really good. Like, he does a lot of Foley, which brings the show to life. Like, there's keys jangling when they're walking down the hallway if it's about a corrections officer and stuff like this. And they also include a lot of music from within the prison, like a lot of the guys rap and stuff like that. So
Original.
Yeah. Like the songs that prisoners create.
Wow.
They include it in the show. So Ear Hustle is prison slang for eavesdropping. And so the show is about just basically everyday life in prison. And normally they have someone tell their story around a particular topic, but they also go around the yard and they do a lot of vox pops and stuff like that. So like topics include like stuff like how do you find someone to love or date from within prison? Like how do you have sex? Like married people are allowed to have conjugal visits where you can go to like a cottage for 48 hours, but people also find workarounds, which we discover like ways to have sex in the visiting room, just very subtly.
So what, all prisoners are allowed those visits?
Only if they're married.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, but there's a whole episode about this. It's called Inside the Boom Boom Room.
The boom, boom,
boom room. Yeah, but it's like really moving because obviously some people go to prison like at a really young age. Like so there's a guy they interview who's just gotten married and he's 43 and he went to prison when he was 19 and he met this woman on the inside. And he hasn't had any sexual experiences since he's 19. He's 43. Like, it's like being a virgin again, but you're middle-aged. And
terrible.
And he talks about, like, he's so used to being around men all the time, like, barely ever sees women. So he's just afraid of being, like, even hugging her too tightly. Like, he doesn't know how to hold a woman. And he's so used to sleeping alone. Like, he hasn't slept next to someone else for 23 years. So it's just like you start to realize some of the deprivation that comes with being in prison. They also talk about what it's like to be gay.
Can I just say, go on. With lockdown, where we were sort of confined to our homes, I did think about what it must be like being incarcerated because it's hard, it's horrible.
There's one
losing that liberty, and and they don't have half it. At least we can still do whatever we want.
We're in our comfortable homes with our families and, but I do think there is that thing about physical touch and if you don't have that, you start to lose some of who you are as a person. Like one of my friends in lockdown, he met up with a girl from Tinder on a date and they hugged and it's like, Jackie, I felt like I was going to start weeping because no one had touched me for so long. Like, it's just so strange to be without other people. But even in this show, I mean, prisons go into lockdown and then you can't actually leave if there's like a security issue. And there's like this show, there's a huge break between one of the episodes, and it's because they were in lockdown for 3 weeks. They don't leave their cells. They don't go outside. But yeah, they also like cover stuff like what's it like to be gay in prison, which is by all accounts like a really still a very hyper masculine, homophobic place, and or what it's like to be trans in prison. There's a woman, a trans prisoner in there called Lady J, who they interview, who's kind of forced to be living in San Quentin.
Oh my God. You think by now they would have had like transgender prisons?
Well, it's funny, and apparently if you've got full gender reassignment surgery, then you can go to a women's prison, but Lady J hasn't. But it's funny, they said that there's an episode where they talk about what makes you feel good in prison, and they talk about like getting their hair cut and stuff like that. And then Lady J talks about before I don't know, decades ago, because she's been in prison quite a long time, how she used to like create makeup from soot and like use newspaper dye to make lipstick and stuff like this. But now, like in the shop that they have, there's like a transgender section. There's like 6 transgender women in this prison. And then they talk about stuff like what's it like to be on death row. Some people have pets in prison. You're not allowed to, but like people keep bugs, like spiders. Like there's this one guy who keeps like tons of things. He got really upset because he had like 21 snails, and one of the corrections officer threw them away. But again, it was that thing. It's like it's just a human desire to, I guess, look after something. Yeah. And he talks about this idea of like unconditional love, and like he hasn't had that in his life. Like, I mean, lots of these people that have gone to prison for making a mistake, but had like pretty bad childhoods. And I don't think he had like a good relationship with his parents or anything like that. So then like not only thing that's given him unconditional love in his life is animals. And then they talk about being a parent in prison and like what's it like to be in solitary confinement. Because I always thought solitary confinement was like a punishment, but some people are in solitary confinement for like 20 years.
Why?
More.
Why?
I think they probably, I don't know. I think there's probably like they've done crimes where they need to be separated from other prisoners. I don't know. So
do they get outside at all? Or
they do, but they're in their cell most of the time, and they don't have interaction with other people. I just remember they was talking about. It's been a while since I listened to this, but they talk about they have like these cracks in their cell and they push their finger through, and if someone else walks past on their way to someone else, they touch their finger. So it's like they have this sort of touch with each other. I mean, yeah, this show is obviously also about life choices and facing up to mistakes, and probably the most powerful episode, which has sort of stayed with me. This woman who was sex trafficked as a child comes into the prison to talk to a prisoner who's in jail for sex trafficking. And it's interesting in particular because the woman and the man who is in prison, they had very similar childhoods of abuse and molestation.
Wow.
And this man was forced to start basically being a pimp by his mother, who was a sex worker herself, when he was 11. And he continues this into adulthood, and kind of this is all he's ever known for his entire life, but he preys on and grooms young girls and is eventually put into jail on a 229-year to life sentence.
How do they work that out? How can you do 229 years to life? I mean,
I think it's like you have done so many. Each crime you've committed has a however year-long sentence, and if you've committed multiple crimes, obviously it adds up to an enormous number that you'll obviously going to spend your entire life in jail. No one is going to live to 229 years.
No.
But yeah, similarly, this woman that goes to interview him, she was groomed by a man when she was 11 and then forced into prostitution at 13 years old for 3 years. And then at 16, she kills this man, and then she's sentenced to life in prison.
Oh, what?
Yeah. Like she says that she was basically in a court, like with all just white men that never let her tell her story. Like they never knew that she killed him because he had groomed her and forced her into his life. She never told the jury that story. Her sentence is eventually commuted, but she's still spent 19 years in prison. And afterwards, she begins this restorative justice program where victims of crime visit incarcerated people who are perpetrators of the same crime. So basically, so you can start to see the effect of your crime on someone else. So on the podcast, they record her coming to meet this prisoner, and they talk about forgiveness and stuff like that. And at one point, she asked him, like, what would you say to someone who was thinking about trafficking today, who was in your shoes? And like he talks about like himself, like he's surprised how he wasn't killed and the experience of being in prison. And she calls him out of it. She's like, all of your regrets are still about yourself. It's not about the people that you did all these things to. And like, obviously that episode is really heavy, but like there's still light-hearted moments in this show. Like, and it's funny. And I think you see people's humanity. Like, just because someone has committed a crime doesn't mean that they're not a human being. But yeah, the Woods, who's the co-host of Ear Hustle, and Williams, the sound guy, they're incarcerated. Woods is incarcerated for the first 3 seasons of the show, and then he has his sentence commuted by the California state governor, who cites Ear Hustle as like part of his reformation. And so he's out now, and he's like a full-time producer of the show.
Wow, it's incredible.
Yeah, I think Williams has also now been released from prison. And I guess since then the show started to include more episodes about what it's like to reintegrate into society, and like what's it like to get a job, what is it, all that kind of stuff, just being in the world. It's so overwhelming. But I did
read something once where I think it was in Australian prisons that some of those people who had spent most of their life in prison would re-offend to go back into prison because they just couldn't function in the outside world.
Yeah, I think that's really common. At least in prison you understand the world. Like it's there's a place you understand the hierarchy, you understand how to function, and yeah, I think it's really common. But yeah, like there are 8 seasons of this show. I haven't caught up to all the episodes yet, but obviously they start to talk about COVID in prison, and because the show is now they start to go to some other prisons as well, I think, within California. But in 2020 it was a finalist for a Pulitzer Prize. So again, if you don't believe my recommendation, take it from Pulitzer.
Yeah, amazing. I'm definitely going to tune into that. Was it very bleak or?
No, obviously that episode I talked about that because it was so emotional, but it's not all like that. Like there is one episode that's all about the music in prison. There's the pets one is pretty lighthearted. I mean, it's all of it is still quite moving, but yeah.
Wow.
All you need is headphones, remote control,
So I'm listening to a true crimes podcast called Shadow of Truth. It's completely haunting, a lot of twists and turns. It takes place in a small Israeli town. Taharada was 13 years old when she went missing. The mother discovered that she wasn't home and she went searching, door knocking, ringing friends. The father then was called and he went out looking. Eventually they called the police and the police went back to the school and found her body in one of the bathroom stalls or toilet stalls and savagely murdered. It was a brutal death, but made stranger that no one saw anything or heard anything. The 2 journalists that made the podcast took what was made it interesting was it was a very neutral position which they took on this podcast. It was fascinating. It sort of explores the judicial system in Israel. And I have to say, it felt a little bit antiquated and in a way that the convicted killer was somehow set up, and his first lawyer was a conveyancer. I don't think he was even a criminal law lawyer. So the setup goes that, they send him off to jail. They do all this interrogation. His jail mate is an undercover police officer who then basically asks him, what had happened. And this guy, this janitor, somehow starts believing that maybe he did it but wasn't aware of it, and says to his jailmate, "What do you think I should do?" And he said, "You should confess." He said, "That way, you'll get manslaughter and you'll be out." So he does. He eventually confesses, but later retracts his confession, claiming he was coerced into giving it. Anyway, a month after his arrest, the trial begins and he's found guilty. The interesting thing, though, is that the public won't accept the verdict, and that includes the murdered girl's mother. And so the suspicion then shifts to some teenagers.
Why doesn't the mother believe it?
Well...
Why doesn't the public believe it?
They didn't believe it because I think they were privy to what had happened and also the circumstances around this girl. I mean, a janitor in the girls' toilets, it's all kind of strange. It happened during school hours. It wasn't after hours. And, you know, he had no prior convictions. I think he came over from Russia. So he later retracts his confessions, claiming that he was coerced. As I said, the public won't accept the verdict, including the murdered girl's mother. I think the father believes that he was guilty. But then the suspicion kind of shifts to some teenagers and rumours of a conspiracy. Meanwhile, you know, Zadorov is desperately trying to clear his name, and he gets a new lawyer that goes through all the finding, all the evidence, and realises this thing's completely flawed. So, you know, 6 years after the murder, a mysterious person comes forward with some information about the case, and the person goes into great detail and basically points the finger at his old girlfriend. So the girlfriend, I think the lawyer then investigates this thing and the police look into it. And so even though they have this new suspect, they find out that this girl had tried to kill someone while under house arrest. But it's like the authorities do everything in their power to bury the case. It goes back to trial. I think it gets thrown out again. It's phenomenal. It's just incredible listening because you feel like the evidence that kind of mounts up, nothing makes sense. And, you know, I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm not saying he's guilty, but just the structure of the Israeli judicial system, you know, there's no jury, it's 3 judges. I think it's common practice for the police they basically said to this guy who was convicted that they had DNA that conclusively proved that he was there when they didn't have any DNA. And
it's so manipulative.
It's completely manipulative. Fantastic. And it was one of those ones I had to binge listen to it because it was phenomenal. It's still going on. I haven't listened to, there's just been an update recently. But, you know, they interview, these 2 journalists go and interview the mother and talk to her and talk to a whole bunch of people. And, you know, it's I feel for this guy. He's trapped, you know, and no one's innocent. Everyone's kind of been tarnished by, I think, this event. And it's still the talk of the town. And it is interesting, the fact that, you know, most Israelis think this guy's innocent. Really worth watching. So it's called Shadow of Truth. And I definitely want to watch the Netflix program. But I think
it's sort of like it's scary when it shows how, well, apparently it's, if you know how to, it's relatively, you can implant false memories into people's brains and you can convince people they did something, and it just shows you, like, the police are obviously under pressure, they want to close it, they want to get it done, and then easier to just blame it on someone and get
well, I mean, all that stuff that they, you know, those tactics they employ, sleep deprivation, and, you know, it is interesting because he said, maybe I didn't believe, maybe I did it, maybe. But then he's talking about, well, I kind of remember leaving the school and going, picking up, doing this, you know, these errands. And so, you know, it's like he's been brainwashed himself. It is fascinating. And look, it's happened here as well. I mean, you know, Azari Chamberlain, I mean, the mother had done quite a long time in prison as well. And, you know, it was almost like, even with the evidence or not enough evidence, she was convicted.
Yeah, and terrible.
Terrible. And what are you scrolling through?
On a lighter note, I wanted to talk about Depop and this Instagram account Depop drama. I mean, in lockdown, I moved house, and as part of that, I kind of needed to somewhat downsize my wardrobe. And by downsize, I also mean come to terms with the reality that over the past 5 years, I've slowly gained 15 kilos and, like, don't fit half my clothes.
Like all of us.
Lockdown did not help. Anyway, I also have, like, there's been, I realised, an embarrassingly large amount of occasions where I bought something online and it was too small, and instead of just returning it, and maybe that was out of pure laziness, or maybe I just thought, you know, I'd delude myself that I'd lose weight and fit them. I never did. And so there was quite a lot of things in there that have, like, brand new with tags on that I've never worn. So it's a bit of a process for me. But
So what is it exactly? What is this site?
Yeah, so I've been selling a lot of my stuff on Depop, which is an app where people can sell secondhand clothing. And I think it started in the UK. There's a lot of British people on there, but it's pretty big in America as well. It only started in Australia, I think, last year or maybe the year before. It's become huge because obviously there's this swing away from fast fashion. Like, people have realised that a huge amount of landfill is filled with clothes. Like, H&M. And this app, it leans very heavily into aesthetics. It's like, it looks a lot like Instagram. It's almost exactly the same format. And most of the people on the site are Gen Z and around 18. So I'm already way too old to be on there. But like, I've had a decent amount of success because, including selling things that I thought I'd never sell, mainly because the biggest trend in fashion apparently is what they call Y2K, or early millennium fashion, which was when I was a teenager. So some of the stuff I've sold on there are Y2K originals, baby. I have not a hoarder, but I've held on to a lot of things that I had from back in high school so long that they are now in fashion, like earrings I've sold on there and stuff like that.
On eBay, you might have got triple.
Maybe. I don't know. I just like Depop. I like the format, maybe because I'm just suckered into the aesthetic of it. eBay is ugly and like difficult to navigate. But like, I've sold over 100 items and made more than $1,000 on stuff that I was just going to otherwise take to Vinnie's. And like, side note, like apparently Vinnie's across Sydney are now getting raided because people are having like really lucrative success on Depop, and like they buy stuff in Vinnie's and upmark them, which like one of my friends did, but at the market. So people have been doing this forever. But like, I've seen stuff on there that's like a jumper from Miller's from the 90s and they're selling it for $70. Like, Miller's is a shop for old ladies in regional towns, and I know that because I'm from a regional town. I've also seen people trying to like pass off jumpers from Kmart as vintage, and like that annoyed me so much I tried to report it. But like, it is possible to buy some pretty amazing secondhand designer stuff on there too. Like, there's people on there selling Louboutins and stuff like that. Hard to assess if it's genuine, but whatever. But like, I worked in retail for probably 7 years. So like, the customer service element of this, I am now a seller and I have to engage with all these people that are coming into my quote unquote shop. So I'm taking me back to working the floor at David Jones Bondi Junction like a bitch. And I guess like, it's reminded me like, customer service is basically holding your face into a frozen smile while people are unreasonable and rude often. I mean, that's obviously really nice people, but you know,
I have a friend, a really good friend, Freddie, who's a bartender. And the other day, or last week, I caught up with him and we had a drink. Anyway, I don't know if it was the appropriate place, but he just broke out into having a bitch about the customers. And there was someone within earshot who kept looking across, and I felt like saying, maybe you should just tone it down a little bit. But he's going, look at me, I'm just like a performing seal.
It is true.
It is true, but there's a time and place for everything.
But it's not uncommon for people on Depop to make really ridiculous requests. And look, part of this is, I think, because there's a lot of really young people on this site. It's like, can you put this on hold until my mum gives me some money? I'm like, no. Or can I like ask for like 50% discounts on something that's already like $15?
So just mark it up.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, or they pretend their PayPal isn't working and they want to do it off the site. I'm like, this is dodgy.
Yeah, no, forget that.
But so to help me like deal with the annoying DMs that I get on there, I've become fairly obsessed with following this Instagram account. It's called @depopdrama, which is just like screenshots of hilarious back and forth DMs between buyers and sellers. And often like they'll be posted being like, who's in the wrong here? And then the comments will like debate it, and it's pretty funny. There are also like, there was one yesterday, there's a pretty extreme horror stories on there. Like, there's a buyer who's complaining to a seller that they sold them a jumpsuit with skid marks in it. And that's the question is like, hi, why is there shit in the jumpsuit? It's fucking vile. And they put a photo of it. And the buyer's just like, oh, I'm so sorry, babe, I lent it to a friend, I didn't see that there. It's like,
yeah, sure.
Okay. But then there's like people who write like messages like, can you do it any lower? 25 pounds maybe? Just to let you know, every Monday at 6 p.m. I watch the old people walk across the road from my bedroom window in case one of them falls over and I am there to pick them up. It's like, I'm a good person, give me a discount. But yeah, like, a lot of this exchange was stupid, but they made me laugh. And then like, there's a lot of people trying to pick up people in the DMs as well to no avail, which is hilarious. Like, people being like, can you show, like, sometimes people post just a skirt or a top, but they're not wearing it. And so it's pretty common for people to ask you, like, can you put a photo of it on? And then the guy writes back, you're fit. what's your Snapchat? And he's like, that's my girlfriend. Stuff like that happens fairly often. But like, I recommend Depop Drama even if you don't have Depop. It's a pretty big Instagram account. It's got 615,000 followers. So yeah, it's funny.
Look, I just you told me about it, and I've got, I collect a lot of shoes. I'm a bit of a shoe hoarder. So I've got a lot of stuff I want to sell. So I did set up that account ready to go. I haven't posted anything yet, but
yeah, I'm surprised. Like all the things that I thought, this is an amazing, like some of the stuff that I was like, this is amazing, just doesn't fit me. This will be the first thing I sell, because in my mind, this is the most fashionable thing on there. But then, no, sometimes it's just like these ugly things that I'm like, just put it on here because I'm going to throw it out anyway. And those are the things that are getting bought. Often it's cheap stuff, but yeah.
But, the thrift shops in Sydney are really expensive.
Yeah, they are.
I went and had a look,
so
and there's some
overpriced.
shitty Hawaiian shirt. It was like $60.
Well, if you go to Newtown, to some of those vintage stores, it's like, this is ridiculous. Some of the prices. It's just like an old jumper. But yeah.
Anyway, so what's the name of that site again?
Depop.
Depop. Oh, we'll set up my account and I'll let you know how I go. I've got the name. I'm ready. I'm ready to do it. So, we spoke, I think, a few podcasts ago about long form and finding interesting sites that are really informative and they're just not press releases. So I found this website /app called newatlas.com. It's one of my favourite sites at the moment. It's like window shopping for stuff if you were really rich.
That sounds like torture to me.
And bored. Look, it was launched in 2002, so it's kind of the early days of the internet and these sorts of places. So they've been around for quite a while. I like it for several reasons. It's actually run by a couple of really old school journos, so their content's fantastic. Their mission basically is to cover topics and innovation around the development of ideas that advance the world. It is really great. It's really diverse.
Is it mainly tech?
Well, no, it does a whole bunch of stuff. Look, the audience, what was really interesting is while the site has a predominantly US, UK and European audience, it's actually an Australian publisher.
Okay.
And I was really surprised. He's got a massive audience. And so, no, it's not just tech. They sort of cover things like science, transport, technology, automotive, electronics. They've got, all this van life stuff. So they've got these vans that pop up every now and then.
It sounds like a site for boys.
It does have a kind of male skew, but, look, they do cover sites and their stuff, and it's long form. It's not a press release and a photo. So they do quite a bit of work, quite a bit of research. They validate a bunch of stuff. But recently, one of the things that I just read recently, which was kind of concerning, but it gives you a taste of what the site's about. But recently they published a first of a kind study which looks at, plastics, and the effects of plastics on human health. And, as you know, plastics break down into microplastics and then, they're in the ocean and they enter the food chain, which we then consume through the food and water. But no one really knows what impact that might have on human cells and whether ingesting plastic has any potential toxic effects. But the findings are alarming and demonstrates how microplastics can alter the shape of and decluster human lung cells. And that I know. And chemicals that are found in plastic can do alarming damage to brain cells. The study was the first of its kind, led by some scientists at Hull York Medical School. They go into it in long form and in a lot of detail. And, what is alarming is that plastics now, I think, what is that? That trench, the deepest part of the ocean. What is it, Mariana?
Yeah.
Is it Mariana, whatever it's called?
Yeah, or something like that.
They're finding plastics down there in the bottom of the ocean, like plastic bags and things like that. They're finding it in the poles, up on Everest. It is everywhere, and it is alarming. And so the other day I was reading something about how there's these floating islands in the ocean made up of plastic, right?
Yeah.
And they're microplastic, and microbes are now living on them and making their homes on them.
It's become an ecosystem.
It has become an ecosystem, but these things break down.
Depressing.
It is really depressing. But, so that's some. So, they'll show you the sporty cars. They'll explain, vertical takeoff aircraft and, new motorbikes and tech and all sorts of stuff. And it is a really interesting site. And, daily there's great content on there. And it is long form, which I really, really like. And the fact that he's an Australian publisher made me very excited. And he's a motorbike rider. I spoke to him.
Oh, you sound like you'd be friends.
We're going to be friends. But
he just doesn't know yet.
He doesn't know yet, but he rides some big Triumph thing, which is not a favourite bike of mine. So anyway, that's called newatlas.com. It really is worthwhile subscribing to. It is like one of the few places or one of these few kind of news websites where it's really broad. It covers a whole bunch of different verticals or genres, and it's written by journalists. So, yeah, a great site. So, is that it?
No, I was going to say, microplastics, we should not be using plastic as much, and we should not be buying as many fast fashion clothes. Look how we are saving the planet with this podcast.
Well,
besides all the electricity that we're using to currently record it.
Well, there you go. Just we shouldn't wear clothes.
This is a naked podcast.
It's a naked podcast. We should go back to just, I don't know, grass skirts. Coconut bras. I did wake up in one of those once.
Did you?
At the end of a party. Yeah. I was young then. We'd like to wish you a really happy and safe holiday. We're going on holidays ourselves, so we probably won't be recording for about 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yes. We all need a break at this time of year after the year we've all had.
Yeah, we do. But have a safe and happy holiday. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast and we'll be in touch. And if there's something that you want us to review or you might find interesting, you can find us on thetools.podcast.com. Have a safe and happy holiday.
Happy holidays.
We're on the tools. All you need is him.